Hello cruel world, my name is Dr. Sohom Das. I'm a consultant forensic psychiatrist. I assess mentally disordered offenders for a living so that you don't have to. Tyler Hadley was not even a man, he was a 17-year-old boy when he killed both of his parents, and he was arrested in the summer of 2011 whilst he was at a house party that he was throwing in his own house whilst his parents' dead bodies were locked in a bedroom. In this video, I'm going to break down the psychological factors and social stressors that might have contributed to these gruesome murders. I'm going to psychoanalyze Tyler for you, my dear viewers, so hopefully together we can get a better understanding of these senseless murders. I've chosen this case specifically because I think the psychology behind Tyler is actually quite twisted and convoluted, and to me it's fascinating. I hope you feel the same way. So I assess and rehabilitate offenders in courts, in prisons and in secure units, and occasionally I even see family members who have killed their relatives. I've seen that at least 3 times in my professional role as a forensic psychiatrist, but never as cold and calculated as this, as I'll come on to. So first of all, I'm going to tell you the background and the story. Full disclosure, I've taken all this information from other YouTube videos, but my video is not about the facts of the offence. I'm just telling you this to put this into context. My video is more about the psychoanalysis of Tyler, because that's my USP. The Hadleys lived in a city named Port St. Lucie, and that's somewhere between Orlando and Miami in Florida. And of course, Florida is the setting for your 2 favourite films, Moonlight and Magic Mike, and it's also the setting for my favourite film, Scarface. You need people like me, so you can point your friggin' finger and say, there, that's the bad guy. So take a look at the bad guy, because you ain't never gonna see a bad guy like this ever again, let me tell you. Sorry. On the surface, the Hadleys seemed like a happy family, but Tyler had quite a turbulent childhood. His parents, the victims, were Blake Hadley and Mary Jo Hadley. Blake was an engineer and Mary Jo was a teacher, and Tyler was born around 1993, and he also had an older brother. His mother, Mary Jo, suffered from chronic mild depression. Tyler was born prematurely, and he was actually in an incubator for the first month of his life, which I think can be significant, as I will come to later. Tyler started showing similar symptoms of depression to his mother by the age of 6, pretty young, and was signed up for counselling. He was prescribed Lexapro, also known as escitalopram, at the age of 10. Now, people often just say they're depressed, but they just mean that they're feeling a bit sad and miserable, like your girlfriend's dumped you because of your BO, or like England lost to Italy in the final, or like people are taking liberties by not subscribing to your YouTube channel. But clinical depression is much more than this. It is a prolonged low mood, so it's not temporary, and it's also associated with other symptoms such as a lack of energy and motivation and drive. And people that have clinical depression, they lack enjoyment in activities and pastimes that they might have enjoyed before, known as anhedonia. Plus, they often have what we call somatic symptoms, so poor appetite, poor sleep, poor concentration, etc. So at the age of 15, Tyler was prescribed Adderall for ADHD. As you probably know, this is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And this is a condition that includes symptoms such as inattentiveness, hyperactivity, having a short attention span, constantly fidgeting, and acting sometimes impulsively without thinking. So when I look back to my clinical experience, children that I've assessed in clinics with this diagnosis are often out of their seats within minutes of coming into the room. They're examining the books on my bookshelf, they're fiddling with my stationery, they often interrupt conversations, and they also jump between topics when they're talking. At the age of 15, Tyler was prescribed, as well as Prozac, which is fluoxetine, another antidepressant. And he was also medicated due to a thyroid hormone abnormality. So already we can see that he's on multiple medications, which I will come back to later. By the way, the thyroid gland is a small, like butterfly-shaped gland in the neck, just in front of the windpipe, which is your trachea, and it produces hormones that help regulate the body's metabolisms. These hormones, in case you're interested, are called triiodothyronine, T3, and thyroxine, T4. Not to be confused with the T1000, which is a cybernetic organism made out of liquid metal sent back in time to kill John Connor. Underactive thyroid glands are associated with depression, and overactive thyroid glands are associated with anxiety. So by the time he was 16, Tyler also had bulimia and low self-esteem. So as you probably know, people who have bulimia binge on a lot of food in a very short amount of time, and then they make themselves sick, or they use laxative, or they do excessive exercise, all to stop themselves gaining weight. It is most common in young people aged 13 to 17, and roughly about a quarter to a third of sufferers are thought to be male. Much smaller percentage in anorexia, but that's different story. So already we see Tyler has all these different diagnoses, plus he was bullied at school in part for his height, and his mother convinced him to take growth hormone injections. Tyler was apparently seen by his neighbours in the community as being this polite and respectful young lad. He had a number of hobbies, including skating, skateboarding, and playing baseball. As a kid, Tyler was relatively shy, but into his early to mid-teens he became quite eccentric. He was described as quirky and a bit odd. So this change in personality in itself is irrelevant to me. It doesn't really indicate mental illness, because children often come out of their shell as they get a bit older, and they often kind of shift personalities when they're just trying to find themselves. You know, like that time you tried to be a goth for 3 months. Apparently, Tyler was quite attention-seeking at school. He would shout out and he would make odd comments during lessons. This could have been a feature of his ADHD, but then again, could have just been a reflection of his personality, or it could have been him wanting to fit in just to get attention. In 2010, so that's the year before the killing, Tyler and his friends apparently took a couch out to a nature reserve and they set it on fire. So this was potentially quite serious, and the fire department were involved. They weren't particularly happy because apparently the whole park potentially could have been set on fire. Now, to me personally, this is not necessarily that significant, because it's just, you know, kids being kids. It's a bit stupid, but I don't think we should judge, because as it says in the Bible, he who has never burnt a sofa should cast the first stone. I think it was just a situation of kids and trying to impress their friends, as opposed to, for example, somebody committing a potentially dangerous arson with a specific intent to hurt or kill people. So to me, this is more callous, careless, rather than deviant or dangerous. Soon afterwards, Tyler was prescribed hydroxyzine, which is an antihistamine used for anxiety, and then he was put on citalopram, another antidepressant. And around this time, he started to get more heavily into substance misuse. He was using cannabis, alcohol, and ecstasy. By 2011, the year of the killing, Tyler had started doing petty offences, which included aggravated battery, and the victim was actually one of his own friends, and burglary, and he even went to prison for a week. So to me, this is more disturbing. This is starting to show a pattern of antisocial behaviour as opposed to random impulsive acts, and he actually hurt his own friend, which, as I'll come to later, I think is significant. Around this time, his relationship with his mother became increasingly tense. They would frequently argue, and there was this kind of unexpected layer of hatred and vitriol towards her, and his mother even confiscated his phone, which massively angered Tyler. So let's jump forward a bit. On the night of the gruesome discovery, which was the 16th of July 2011, which incidentally was exactly 1 week before I got married, Tyler put a message on his Facebook page inviting people to his house party, and he said to people that his parents were out of town. It was an open invite, although he wasn't very popular. However, Port St. Lucie is quite a boring, lazy city, so over 60 people turned up to the party within the first few hours. Most of the people didn't actually know who Tyler was, and they trashed his house, which to me reflects how much of a social outcast Tyler was, how disrespectful they were to him. And this might have explained to a degree why he goes out of his way to try and impress his friends. So these partygoers, they tore up his furniture, they threw cans around the place, they smashed bottles, and eventually after midnight, 100 people turned up. But Tyler didn't even really seem to care about the way his house was being disrespected, which would have been at odds with somebody who would be scared with their parents coming back over the weekend. Tyler, towards the end of this party, took his best friend aside and he admitted that he killed his parents. His best friend thought he was joking, obviously, and then he noticed that Tyler's parents' cars were actually parked further down the road. And then Tyler took this boy to the garage where there were some bloodstains on the floor, and then he took him into the master bedroom, which was locked throughout the party. And the room was completely disheveled, there was furniture strewn everywhere, items everywhere, but underneath this pile of furniture were the dead bodies of Tyler's parents. And then Tyler told his best friend in macabre detail exactly what he'd done that afternoon. So he'd hidden his parents' telephone so they couldn't call for help. Then he kind of psyched himself up by taking 3 ecstasy pills. To me, this is a bit odd, as ecstasy usually results in a loving, warm, kind of euphoric feeling, so I've heard. Other drugs are more renowned to cause disinhibition and aggression, such as cocaine or alcohol, so I've heard. And it just goes to show how committed Tyler was to his idea of murdering his parents. And then he grabbed a massive hammer from his garage. He stood behind his mother for several minutes as she was working on the family computer, and he told his friends that he visualized what he was about to do to her, and then he repeatedly hit her over the head with a hammer. His father, who was asleep, woke up to the screams. He came running downstairs, saw the aftermath, saw his own son standing there with a hammer. He asked Tyler why, to which Tyler replied, "Why the fuck not?" And then Tyler beat his father to death and wrapped the bodies in towels. He then threw lots of random household items over the bodies to bury them. Then he cleaned up some of the mess, and then he took a long, hot shower. And it was later discovered that Tyler withdrew $5,000 in cash from his parents' account. So he told his friend all of this. His friend left the party and called the police. Tyler carried on partying, mostly with random strangers that he didn't know, who'd rocked up to his house and damaged it, until the police came at around 5 in the morning. When the police searched the house, they found prescriptions for all those aforementioned antidepressants and all these tablets. To me, I wonder whether he was actually taking his medication. If he wasn't, then it could have led to a relapse of his symptoms. It was revealed afterwards that Tyler would tell his friends that he fantasized about killing his parents and having a house party, so he basically telegraphed his intentions exactly to his friends, and they never took it seriously, thinking it was just one of his weird jokes. So should his friends have known better? Should they have done anything about it? In my opinion, to be fair to them, the vast majority of people who'd make such comments would not carry out such horrific crimes. And also Tyler was kind of renowned for making silly comments to get attention. That was kind of his thing. And also the vast majority of people who had those true intentions wouldn't openly admit it to people. So personally, I don't think they can be blamed for not foreseeing his gruesome acts. In March 2014, Tyler was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The death penalty wasn't considered because he was only 17 at the time of the murders. Apparently, weeks later, in a letter to a friend, he expressed some degree of guilt and remorse. And he also stated that he was talking to the devil and the devil was talking back to him around the time of the killings, and this is why he did what he did. I'll come back onto that. Okay, now the juicy bit. Let's look at my personal psychoanalysis of Tyler. This is my area of expertise because I assess mentally disordered offenders for a living in prisons and in courts. This is the bit that you can't get from other YouTube channels. So, I think there's a lot of psychological elements in this case that have contributed to Tyler's actions. Chronologically, the first thing is his premature birth. He was in an incubator for the first month of his life. And although the connection is kind of crude and weak, generally speaking, most mental illnesses, the incidence of them is increased when there has been brain trauma at birth, from schizophrenia to learning disabilities. And on top of that, he was separated for an entire month from his family, from warmth, from emotions, from cuddles, from connections, and it's likely that his emotional bonding with his mother would have been affected. And it can also affect his future bonds and relationships. Just like we know that young children who are moved around in care at a young age, even when they're treated well, become emotionally detached and emotionally distant. But to me, by far the most significant thing that strikes me is the medicalization of Tyler. He was said to have symptoms of depression as a child as early as 6 years old. So he would have been genetically predisposed to suffer mood disorders because his mother suffered from depression, and we know that this runs in families. Personally, I think that his parents probably had the best intentions, but it can be quite unintentionally damaging to label a kid and make them feel that they're different at such a young age. This would have planted a seed in him, a negative cognition, which would have been, there is something wrong with me, I am damaged. Tyler was then prescribed Lexapro at the age of 10 and given more antidepressants at the age of 15. He was given Prozac, and then in later years he was given citalopram. And I can say from my clinical practice that it's highly unusual for anybody to be given antidepressants at such a young age, at the age of 10. So I think, again, his parents might have had the best intentions, but arguably it might have been more helpful to only stick with talking therapy. And also, to me, this change of antidepressants on so many different occasions, it kind of reeks of desperation. So rather than clinical success, the family was clutching onto straws to make changes, although this obviously wasn't helping. So we all know that some antidepressants work well in some adults, but the more time you have to change, the decrease the rate of success in the future, if that makes sense. So it suggests that it's just simply not going to work. And also, the evidence on the beneficial effects of antidepressants on people that young is very limited. Personally, as a psychiatrist, I wouldn't prescribe antidepressants to anybody under 18. I can envisage some situations where it might be appropriate, for example, as an absolute last resort, for people who are sectioned at a young age, or people who have had serious suicidality who are kids. Personally, I wouldn't do it myself. I would refer to a CAMHS, child and adolescent mental health specialist. So I can see where it could be suitable, but I don't think that Tyler's situation is appropriate. So on top of all of this, Tyler had known thyroid problems. And as I've said before, underactive thyroid associated with depression, overactive thyroid, anxiety. And he was taking medication for his thyroid. This might have been appropriate because unlike antidepressants, it's usually fairly easy to medicate thyroid issues because you can do blood tests to measure the hormone levels, so you can adjust the doses quite sensibly. Whereas in depression, in fact, I'll be the first one to admit this as a psychiatrist, in all of psychiatry, there is no direct blood test for any illness, so you have to use your own clinical judgment. And then at the age of 16, Tyler was diagnosed with bulimia, which is also associated with problems with self-confidence, self-esteem, preoccupation with body image. So to me, this all indicates that Tyler was isolated, marginalized, possibly he was compared to his perfect older brother, and therefore he probably developed a bit of an inferiority complex. Now, on top of all of that, he's bullied for his height, which would have been traumatic, but also his mother gave him the solution of giving him more growth hormones. Again, she's medicalizing the problem. Again, this would have made him feel more inadequate. It would have reinforced those negative cognitions that there is something wrong with me. Believe it or not, I was actually quite short and fat as a kid, and I hit puberty much later than my peers. So whilst my school friends were dealing with various body hairs, I had to deal with a squeaky high voice. And, looking back on it, it was emotionally difficult. And I'm sure that most people who go through puberty and adolescence struggle at some points. And parents can be there, they can be supportive, or sometimes teenagers just have to deal with it by themselves and they just have to get over it. But I don't think treating Tyler with medication would have helped. So we've already got a picture of a young man who is marginalized, who's lonely, who feels alienated, who feels different, who's very self-conscious. And then you throw into the mix alcohol, cannabis, ecstasy. I mean, it's not particularly unusual for teenagers to experiment with those drugs, but the vast majority of teenagers will not have that background psychiatric issues, diagnoses, mental disorders. So I think it's fair to say that Tyler already had quite a fragile mental state. So his use of drugs would be riskier than the average person. Then he gets punished for his behavior, including his phone being confiscated, and this escalates tensions between him and his mum. And that's the very person that's been medicalizing him all this time. So maybe there was potentially even subconscious feelings of bitterness towards her for labeling him. And we know there's at least one incident of aggravated battery towards a friend in 2010 and also burglary. This suggests that Tyler was already developing some pro-criminal attitudes and antisocial tendencies. And the very fact that the aggravated assault was against his own friend tells us something about Tyler. It tells us that he has no qualms in discharging violence, even if it's to somebody close to him. So he doesn't have that barrier, that kind of moral filter that you and I might have unless you beat up your friends. I don't know. So perhaps this was an emerging personality disorder. I've got videos on my channel about what that is and about the dangers of labeling them if you're interested. Although technically you can't diagnose Tyler with a personality disorder until they've turned 18 because personality hasn't fully developed then. Personally, I think he's a bit too young to know that for definite. Another possibility, however, is conduct disorder. So conduct disorder is a severe condition characterized by hostile and sometimes physical violent behavior, disregard for others. Kids with this, they exhibit cruelty from early pushing as a child to biting and hitting and lashing out to when they become bullies, they indulge in teasing and bullies as teenagers more. They hurt animals, they pick fights, they do thefts, vandalism, etc., etc. I'm not sure that applies to Tyler because he was seen as this quite well-behaved kid in his earlier years. But if I was assessing him, I'd certainly want to know more about these behaviors and whether these attitudes actually existed. If I was assessing Tyler, I'd want to know the extent of his drug use. So was he just somebody who got a bit wasted at the weekends, or was this a daily occurrence? And I'd also want to know if previously when he was on drugs he was disinhibited, and if he was disinhibited, whether he was violent. Okay, so now let's have a think about the actual murder. So were these murders pre-planned or impulsive? I think the murders were pre-planned. Although, despite that, I think his actions afterwards were sloppy, without much thought and without much planning. So we know that Tyler hid his parents' phone so they couldn't call for help. And we know that he was standing behind his mother for several minutes, apparently thinking and fantasizing about what he was going to do, which is a very long time to decide, actually, nah, I don't think I'm going to kill my mother today. So to me, the very fact that he did all this suggests an element of pleasure in the attack. He's reveling in it, as opposed to, for example, somebody who's petrified and just wants to get this over with. So to me, this suggests instrumental violence. So that's violence that's for a purpose. In Tyler's case, more freedom or to rid himself of his punishers, as opposed to reactive violence, which is more heat in the moment in response to a state of rage. So Tyler's actions afterwards did not seem in any way frantic or panicked, but actually he seemed quite calm and collected. So he cleaned up, he showered himself, he then later went out to withdraw $5,000 from his parents' bank account. So to me, this doesn't show any kind of level of remorse or regret. So I do wonder what his future plans were, if any. So he seemed quite careless. Put it this way, if you killed your parents, you'd probably be extremely scared and shocked. You'd probably be worried about being caught for a start. You'd have plans in place to dispose of the bodies. Your social life would probably not be a high priority. But what does Tyler do? He throws a house party. He also didn't really seem to have a plan of disposing for the bodies, and he literally and figuratively just covered them up and clearly thought he would just deal with it later. So this impulsiveness and this failure to plan ahead could indicate an emerging personality disorder like antisocial personality disorder, but it could also be a symptom of Tyler's established ADHD. So something that I would want to address if I was assessing him is this. As I mentioned before, according to a letter from prison to his friend, Tyler claimed to have been hearing the voice of the devil leading up to the offence. Personally, I think this was a, what's the term? Pink mackerel? No, red herring. Before I explain why, I would quickly like to introduce you to this channel. So, welcome to A Psych for Sore Minds, your one-stop shop for learning about mental illness or offending. My name is Dr. Sohom Das. I'm a consultant forensic psychiatrist. I assess a whole range of mentally disordered offenders. I work as an expert witness, giving evidence in criminal trials in court. This channel, A Psych for Sore Minds, is the best thing on YouTube. Possibly. I dissect a whole range of cases some related to violence and offending, some not. I talk about individual diagnoses, I talk about high profile cases like this. Sometimes I talk about my own patients, but I anonymize their details out of respect for patient confidentiality. What I'm trying to say is there's something for everybody on this channel. So back to these apparent voices. Now, I'm very convinced that Tyler definitely would have been assessed by a forensic psychiatrist during his trial, because he's already got a history of mental illness, he's got multiple diagnoses, he's committed such a serious, inexplicable offence at such a young age. So for all of these reasons, he would have had a mental health assessment. Therefore, if this supposed psychosis had been revealed, it would have been diagnosed, it would have been raised as an issue at his trial, and according to my understanding, it was not. So what does that all mean? Well, I think there's different possibilities. I mean, first of all, you can hear voices as part of a personality disorder, but they're usually quite fleeting and not so intense compared to psychosis. And also, you rarely have a back and forth like he was describing. He was saying that he was talking to the devil. So he could have had a psychosis and this was misdiagnosed. For example, it's not inconceivable that negative symptoms of schizophrenia were similar to the depression that he had. So he could have had his symptoms during this trial, but he could have hidden them, which wouldn't make sense, because why would he hide them? Why would he tell his friends about later? I think it's far more likely that Tyler had retrospectively created or fabricated the story to justify his actions, saying that he was psychotic, and that's much more likely to be. Now, just to be clear, for any of you trolls hunched over your keyboard, even though I think there are many factors that contributed to Tyler's psychological makeup and they might help us understand his behaviour, I'm categorically not saying that that would make him less culpable for his murderous, heinous acts. As mentioned, in 2014, Tyler was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. So before I conclude with my final thoughts for this very tragic case, I first would like to beg you to subscribe to this YouTube channel. Not only does it help me out immeasurably, but it actually reduces global warming. Also, spread the love, tell your favorite people about this YouTube channel because they deserve to see it. So to conclude, there are many elements of Tyler's background and his childhood that, in my opinion, were kind of warped dark, would have caused all this emotional turmoil. To me, the most significant issue is the medicalization of Tyler. I don't think his mental illnesses or his mental health issues directly drove his offending to the degree, for example, that he wasn't in control of his thoughts and actions. And as I've said earlier, I don't think that he was any less criminally culpable than the average person. But at the same time, I think it's possible to see how some of these issues would have contributed to Tyler's feeling inadequate, feeling marginalized, feeling isolated, believing that he was damaged. So as I said, I think this led to a humongous inferiority complex. So it just goes to show people how important it is to look after the welfare of your children, because you never know, there could be another Tyler in the making and he might invite you to a house party soon. Dun dun dun. Right, before I go, quickly want to tell you about CrimeCon, huge convention in the UK. Coming over for the first time. It's going to be in London in September, on the 20th and 21st, I believe, of September. I'm going to be there. I'm going to be giving a talk. You'll hear from lots of police investigators about unsolved crimes. If you're a true crime fan, you have to come. Use the code PSYCH. All details in the link below to get 10% off. You deserve it. You should come along. Until next time, stay euthymic, and please remember, I love you.